Welcome to the American Academy of Grief Counseling's video on child and adolescent grief counseling. We offer a certification in this particular specialty, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later at the end of this particular video. What we're going to discuss for the most part today is about children and grief and how it affects children differently, and how caregivers and adults should respond to that type of loss and grief in younger individuals. It's important to realize that children grieve differently than adults, and a lot of it depends on their age, their mental maturity, and how they understand the concept of loss. So we cannot just give one explanation for all children, because there are so much psychological changes that go from an infant to a toddler, to a preschooler, to a grade schooler, and then to an adolescent. That they're almost totally different minds. And so we have to adjust. But the one thing that is common for all situations of loss and younger children is that it must be addressed and it must be discussed between the caregiver, the adult, and the child, because if not, later complications can emerge in life. So we're going to first start with infants and toddlers. Infants at the youngest age form attachments with their caregivers or their parents. So the attachment is very strong. In fact, John Bowlby from the 1960s, he was a psychoanalyst. He did a lot of work and experiments with young infants and toddlers and how they responded when their caregiver left them. And usually, obviously, it resulted in crying. And this was the most fundamental reaction to a loss or a bond being broken. And John Bowlby is famous for his attachment theory, which states that the attachment dictates the bond, and the stronger the bond, the greater the reaction, or the greater the loss itself. So when infants are stripped of their caregiver, they naturally cry. It is a loss. And what we've discovered is children who are neglected, who aren't cared for, who are left to cry, usually end up with later complications in their teenage years or early adult life in regards to forming healthy relationships, healthy romantic relationships as well. So children and toddlers respond to grief differently. And it is important that trust is established in this early phase. In fact, Erik Erikson, another famous psychologist, listed 8 phases of development of children. And coincidentally, trust and mistrust is stage 1. So establishing that trust and understanding what that can do if that bond is broken weighs heavily on the child and his or her subsequent development. So things to look for when little children are grieving is crying, biting, sleep patterns, bad eating habits. They might eat less, thumb sucking as well. So babies and toddlers need to be comforted, and they need a routine, and especially during loss. Preschoolers experience loss a little bit differently. They have some understanding of what death is, but many of them, depending on their maturity, see it as temporary or something that can be reversed. And this loss that they experience, as they begin to see that it is not temporary, you will begin to see regression in various mental and emotional habits. You'll be able, you will notice that there is a lack of communication. They're unable to communicate maybe exactly what they are feeling. And they will begin to display their feelings and thoughts in play. This is why many psychiatrists and psychologists and licensed counselors use play therapy as a way to get to the root of a problem in children. Children also at this age intermittently grieve. They intermittently grieve here and there. They may not grieve the day of, they may grieve a week later. They may be happy at one moment and then sad on another moment. So it's very hard to gauge a child on what they're feeling. So it's very important to understand the psychology of a child. What counselors and caregivers, fathers and mothers and so forth, can do for their children at this age is provide a concrete terminology. This will avoid confusion with various phrases. Examples: mommy or daddy or grandpa, they went to heaven and they can't be here anymore, but Jesus or God or whatever deity you believe in wanted them. So this type of well-intentioned phrase will start to confuse the child. Well, why can't I have my mom? Why can't I have my dad? Or why can't I have my nana or grandma or tata? Why can't I have them? Why does God have to take my beloved one away from me? Another common one to try to shield children from the harsh reality of death, which is something we should not do, but is a well-intentioned phrase, is mommy or daddy or grandpa has gone to sleep. And children can misdiagnose sleep and death as something that is not it. I mean, if it's sleep, well, why isn't mommy or daddy or grandma waking up? So these types of well-intentioned phrases can confuse the child. The other reason why we want to speak to children about death is to dismiss magical thinking. A child may be angry at a parent one day or a grandparent or a friend and think something awful about them, and they might think that their thought actually had an effect on the death. And this can lead to major complications later in life if it's not rooted out and addressed. So it's very important, I feel, that children are told about death, and it's discussed thoroughly to not only teach them, but to also help them remove anything that might be pathological in their particular thinking. Now, as we proceed to grade school, the understanding of death becomes more permanent. It's a reality in life, and many grade schoolers understand that the individual is not coming back. Grief is expressed through play, and others also express grief through various outlets. Maybe they discuss it with friends. Maybe they discuss it with a teacher. It's important, though, that again, grief is discussed within the family setting, that it is addressed so that we can avoid possible social regression or acting out, which are very common in this age group following a loss. Parents need to be there to help their children to vent, but to also offer constructive alternatives on how to express the grief and the loss and the frustration, maybe through sports, exercise, or games where children usually talk about their problems during play. Funerals should not be avoided. And I really want to emphasize this as one of the most important points on this particular slide. For ages, society wanted to exclude children from funerals, whether it's their parent, grandparent, or so forth. And this exclusion caused many issues because the child was not able to express him or herself. The child was not able to receive the closure that the child needed. So the good intention to shield the child again from death, something that I'm trying to dismiss, was something all too common years ago in trying to protect the child. But instead, you're actually hurting the child, not allowing the child to experience death, to express the grief associated with death. So by including the children at funerals, we can also teach children how to grieve properly through rituals and through what we do. Children pick up many bad habits from parents who grieve improperly. For instance, men feel that there's a special type of attitude that they must exhibit during grief. Men don't cry, that type of misconception. So this can be easily passed on to children and cause future complications. Now, as we approach adolescence, obviously death is understood, but with death comes many emotional and spiritual questions. Existential crises can emerge, so to speak. The search for meaning of life. Why do good things happen? Why do bad things happen to good people? This is something that children will look for, and maybe teens especially will start to question their faith. And that's why you have to be there as a parent to help explain why bad things happen to good people. Teenagers will commonly withdraw. They'll become angry at life, maybe. Maybe some will feel guilty because there's still a possibility for that magical thinking to be within their minds. So what we want to do instead is, again, be there to encourage discussion, support, and listen to the problems that are being caused within the teen's life because of this. And realize teenagers are going through many changes in life. Puberty sets in for many, and chemical changes are taking place. So issues can emerge during a loss, and the teenager might look for other ways to express that loss with all the confusion, with everything, bad crowds, drugs, and so forth. So you have to be on top of a loss that a teenager is experiencing as a parent. Death experiences are important benchmarks in a child's life. Something that was once, again, frowned upon to protect the child has now been seen as something that's important. Death is as much as part of life as living. So we need to take death experiences and use them as teaching moments, as parents, as teachers, as counselors. The loss of a pet is usually the first experience for many about the reality of death. In the past, you've heard of stories of the goldfish being replaced during the night to try to spare the child the reality of loss. And these are things that are now becoming dismissed as not healthy. The child should understand that something occurred, that something died, and it's healthy to learn about this. One of the more important losses for most children is a great grandparent or a grandparent, and that usually happens within the first 15 years of a child's life, at least a great grandparent. Hopefully, you're able to keep a hold of your grandparents for at least your first 20 to 30 years, but not everyone is as fortunate. But this type of loss, again, is a way for a child to learn that someone that is dear to them, their nana, their tata, their papa, has passed away, and they're able to learn from this and grieve with the parent who's losing a grandparent or a parent themselves in this situation. The loss of a schoolmate is another one. A lot of times children have various illnesses that are dealt with, and children become exposed to that and they learn about that. And it's a good way to discuss death. Also, during teenage years, unfortunately, many children die. Teenagers in particular die in drunk driving collisions. So schools are constantly reminded of death, and schoolmates have to learn to adjust to those types of death. And believe me, at this age, there is an aura of invincibility that exists within the teenager where they think it can't happen to me and so forth, but it does. The loss of a sibling is another loss that happens to some children. It's very critical in their development, and again needs to be discussed because there's complicating issues that surround every loss. Every loss is unique. Some children might have been jealous of their sibling, their brother or sister. They might have been envious or angry at them. And again, magical thinking sets in, guilt sets in. Maybe the sibling needed a lot of care in their final days due to a particular illness, and this illness prevented the other child from receiving the attention that he or she craved. So again, guilt can creep in. So it's important to address these issues early before they grow into more pathological issues in their later life. The loss of a parent is probably the worst. It's the second worst loss you can experience in life, next to losing a child. So the loss of a parent can definitely redirect a route a child will go, especially a teenager and so forth. Without the love of that other parent and so forth, many secondary losses will result. You don't have your parent with you for prom. You don't have your parent with you for your wedding and so forth. So these are lingering effects. So it's very important to discuss the loss of a parent with a child and to let them express what concerns they have. They might also have guilt. They might also have animosity and so forth. What I'd like to introduce here is the American Academy of Grief Counseling's certification program in child and adolescent grief counseling. We offer a 4-year certification in this particular field. It's online and independent study and open to qualified professionals. Unlike our regular grief counseling certification, though, this particular program has one additional prerequisite. It is that you're already certified in grief counseling with the American Academy of Grief Counseling itself. So once you're certified in it, you can enter into this specialty field and earn an additional 4-year certification, which you maintain simultaneously. If you'd like to learn more about this particular program, we have our link to the particular child grief program. We also have a request for information link listed below. And in addition to that, if you would like to contact us, our phone number is 330-652-7776. Again, that's 330-652-7776. And our email here is info@aihcp.org. If you'd like to learn more, obviously, please utilize these contact sources. Also, please, if you take anything from this video, remember that children grieve differently and they cannot be shielded from death and loss. They're important marks in life where individuals must learn to realize that death is a reality. And as parents, as caretakers, as counselors, it's our job to make sure that children receive the proper mental care that they need during a loss. I'd like to thank you for listening today and have a great day.